Hi everyone and welcome back to Not Weave Stitch. My name is Gisela and this week we're going to be looking at basic loom weaving terminology, which will be perfect for beginners getting started. I hope everyone's been having a great week so far. This podcast will be going out at the start of October, so it is now spooky season officially. So I don't know about you, but I'm already putting up my decorations for Halloween. So do let me know in the comments if you've got any kind of autumnal or Halloween decorations going up, or if you're doing any Halloween crafts, let me know what you are currently working on. But leading on from last week, I wanted to discuss today basic loom weaving terminology to really help you out if you are just getting started, because there are so many terms which I still find quite confusing. So I thought I'd go through a few of them today. It's not an extensive list of it all because I do not want to overwhelm you. There are much more advanced terminology, and it also depends on the type of loom that you are working on as well. But I've picked out some of the key ones I think are quite important when you first get started. So the first terminology I wanted to talk about was the warp. So that's W-A-R-P, the warp. And that is basically the set of vertical threads that are stretched tightly on the loom. And they basically provide the structure. They're like the skeleton of your project there. And with your warp, you want to make sure that you are using material that's quite sturdy, because you want to make sure that you've got good tension. So a lot of the time you want to use quite sturdy cotton, which can be a great skeleton base for your project. You don't want anything that is too soft, too wobbly, that might snap, because we do need that tension to get a really good weave. And leading on from that, when we talk about tension, it's how tight the warp threads are stretched across your loom. So like I just said, we want to make sure that there's really good tension there. We don't want it so that it's a bit loose or dropping down. We want to make sure that we've got great tension so that we can weave through it. So where the warp is the vertical threads, the weft, which is W-E-F-T, is the horizontal threads that are woven usually over and under the warp threads, and that creates the fabric. So where you have the warp, you want to be very particular about the cotton that you use there, or whatever material it may be. You want to make sure that it is nice and tight and sturdy. With the weft, you can be really creative with it. So you can pick different thickness of yarns, you can use ribbons, you can use roving wool, all sorts of different materials there to weave through your warp threads, and this really builds up your project. The shed, which is S-H-E-D, is a little bit more complicated. So basically, it's the opening created between the raised and lowered warped threads. So this is where the weft is usually passed through. So while you're weaving, the warp threads are alternately separated into two different sets. You've got the upper set and the lower set. And if you separate these two, you can then pass that weft thread all in one go. It just makes it a lot easier, and it also speeds up the process of weaving. And this separation bit between the upper and lower warp threads is called the shed. So that's the little area basically between the warp threads there. So it just basically speeds up the process and makes it a lot easier to weave through. When you are weaving through, so when you are making your weft, you will usually have a tool that carries the weft thread through the shed. So this is normally called a shuttle, and it's basically a tool that makes it easier to carry that yarn through all together, because otherwise it can become a bit tangled or it comes undone. So the shuttle just makes it as a little transport, I think of it as, to transport it through your project. The heddle, which is H-E-D-D-L-E, is a device used to hold and guide each warp thread. and that helps to create the shed there. So it links in with the shed. Again, a little bit more of a technical term there. So you won't always get a heddle. It depends on the type of loom there, but with some looms you do get a heddle, and that's basically used to hold and guide each warp thread, and that creates the shed. So when you are weaving your shuttle across, so when you are doing your wefts, you will use a technique called bubbling. So instead of pulling the weft straight across tightly, which can draw in the sides, so it can make it quite narrow in the centre of your piece, and we don't want that. So to stop that from happening, you do the bubbling technique, and basically you make like a hill or a big curve in your weft, and by doing this it will then allow you, when you push it down, to have it a bit looser, then you don't have such quite tight tension, and it keeps all of the warp threads in a straight line. It doesn't start bringing them in the centre. So the bubbling is really important. So make sure that when you weave you have a gentle curve. It kind of goes curving upwards in a series of bubbles, or a bubble across the warp, and then you can push that down, and then it will make a straight line which is not too tight. A reed, which is R-E-E-D, or sometimes known as a beater, is a comb-like frame that pushes the weft securely into place after each pass. So like I was just saying with the bubbling, you will do the bubbling technique, and then you will get your beater or your reed, whatever you are using, and after you've done a row, then you will use this beater and you will gently beat the weft, basically combing it downwards, and it means that you push that weft into place. So that's when you make your rows or diagonals, whatever it may be, but you're basically pushing it into the place you want it to sit. The next word, I hope I pronounce it properly, I never know how to say this. It's called selvage, S-E-L-V-A-G-E. Sometimes it's known as selvage, S-E-L-V-E-D-G-E. So this is the edge of the woven fabric, and it basically keeps it from unravelling. So it's usually formed when the weft turns back at the sides of your project there. So that is the selvage. So I think those are the main terms that you need to know if you're just getting started. There are a huge amount more, but a lot of the time that's for more advanced looms. And if you're a beginner, I would normally say that you would work with a frame loom. So a lot of these things that you don't really need to know just yet, I can always do an episode at a later point that goes through more of the advanced terminology there. But the last few that I wanted to talk through is the actual weaving techniques themselves. So again, this is not an extensive list of them, it's just a few of the main examples. So the most basic simple weave that you'll get is usually called a plain weave or tabby weave. I know it as the tabby weave. And when you are weaving horizontally across, then each weft goes over one warp thread and then under the next. So what you're doing is going over, under your warp threads, and that's what produces that plain weave that you normally would see. A twill, which is T-W-I-L-L, is a weave that creates diagonal lines. And it's made by passing the weft over two or more warps before going under one, or vice versa. So it's a different, slightly more complex compared to the plain weave technique there, but it can make some really gorgeous designs. The sumac weave is a technique of making a sumac which involves wrapping wefts over a certain number of warps before drawing them back under the last two warps again. Sumac is spelt S-O-U-M-A-K, and I love making sumac plaits. So I will take nice long pieces of roving wool and I will make my sumac technique, and it really is great to add a bit of texture and different detail in your weaves. So that is sumac. And lastly is rya knots. So rya, R-Y-A, are a weaving technique that basically creates the fringing effect, or it adds texture to your woven projects. And you usually see them at the end of the weave, so like at the bottom, to add that lovely fringing. I kind of think of it like tassels. So it adds that fringing along the edges, but you can also add them anywhere in your project if you want to give more of like a texture theme to it, or make it feel like densely packed pile weave. So that is the rya knot. So as a beginner, I would take a look at those terminologies, and you can easily Google them just to get the images as well to explain it a little bit better. But those are the main ones that I would recommend knowing when you get started there, and having a go with those different weaving techniques as well. I hope that's helped a little bit to make it a little bit more understandable, because there's so many terms when it comes to loom weaving. It can be really overwhelming, and it all depends on the loom that you're using, the different bits of the kit, the techniques that you're using. So hopefully that's made it a little bit more understandable for a beginner. And like I said, if people do want to know more of the intermediate or advanced terminology, let's say for the bigger standing looms, then do let me know. So I always like to mention in my episodes that there is a YouTube channel that I have, which has lots of different craft ideas and step-by-steps how to make those projects. So you will find that under Gisela Narten. So that's GISELA So feel free to have a look at my YouTube channel and subscribe to that to get lots of lovely videos. I also have a Patreon which follows along with this podcast. So you'll find me under Not Weave Stitch. And under there, it's a nice little community where I pop in some extra information, some extra resources. There's also a little community place where we can have a chat. I can answer some questions if you have any, or you can pop in photos of the projects that you're currently working on. So feel free to have a look at my Patreon, and we do have different levels of memberships on there. And it really does help to keep the podcast going, because I'm just completely self-funded. So anything that you can help would really help with the podcast. So as ever, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.